So I'm here setting my seder table as I get ready to host the first seder later this week. And this year we're expecting 15 people, including 3 guests who are not Jewish. They're either partners or fiancés of our friends' adult kids, and in one case it's my son's classmate. And it's the first time some of them will be exposed to a seder. Now, I've had non-Jewish guests at holiday meals before, but I'm really worried about this one for some reason. Maybe it's because it's the first seder since COVID that we're not all on Zoom, but actually in my house all together. And I want to make the night meaningful for everyone. But how much should I stop and explain? And what parts of the seder are they actually permitted to do under Jewish law? And how should interfaith couples navigate this week, since Passover and Easter and even Ramadan are all happening simultaneously on the calendar? Unlike most Jewish holidays where a rabbi leads the service and tells everybody what to do, on Passover at Seder, we're in charge because it happens in our homes. So everybody has to figure out what kind of Seder is right. So we asked some experts for advice on how they make it work. David Spigelman and his wife Jenny will be attending Seder at his parents' place in Winnipeg, where David grew up Ashkenazi Jewish. Jenny is agnostic. She has Indigenous and Irish-English roots. The couple has 3 sons. They're being raised Jewish. And on the weekend, the family will head to Jenny's grandmother's farm for Easter dinner, hunting Easter eggs, and the famous hot cross buns.
At grandma's, I personally will just avoid it and try not to. But Easter at the end of the day, all of these holidays are about being with family. And the last thing you want to do is not be with family.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Tuesday, April the 4th, 2023. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, sponsored by Metropia. Navigating multiple religious holidays is probably a situation that's being faced in many homes this week. In Winnipeg, interfaith marriage is much higher than the national average. It's close to 50%. Elsewhere, about 25% of Jewish married couples in Canada now have a spouse who isn't Jewish. That's 1 in 4, and it's growing from a generation ago. But Jenny and David Spigelman have made it work for the past 9 years, and they join me now from River Heights.
Hi, Ellen.
Hi, thank you for having us.
I'm wondering if you can describe in your house and your household and family, what are you doing to get ready, if anything, for all the faiths that you mark? Anyone can start.
So just the normal getting ready. We've already purchased our 5-pound Costco box of matzah.
Yeah.
You can't have Passover without a box of Costco matzah. And other than that, we actually, again, part of that conversation that we had of getting ready for Passover and changing it and really creating our own traditions is we do a Sephardic Passover. I'm Ashkenazi, and Jenny being not Jewish, the idea of no bread was tough. So we agreed to do a Sephardic style Passover, which, if people aren't aware, it means we just don't have bread, really. We still will have quinoa and rice and corn. So it kind of expands our availability of food during Passover. And pretty much for the most part, we keep it. All 5 of us in this house, and the boys go to school and their lunches are packed for Passover. And I don't eat out at work. I pack a lunch that is Passover and I follow it. Well, for the whole week, as best as we can.
Yeah.
Jenny, your family also has its own traditions, I guess, coming up to Easter. So what do you do, if anything?
Well, we do Easter in the house as well. Like, the Easter bunny does come here. So we hide little chocolate carrots around the house and little eggs and stuff like that. And then we go to my grandma's farm for Easter dinner and celebrate with my family out there. And sometimes that happens to fall over Passover.
I think it always falls
Does
over
it
Passover.
always?
Yeah.
Okay, well, falls over Passover. And
so what do you do about that eating problem or not eating problem?
I'll avoid grandma's buns for Easter. but I'll still eat dinner with everybody because at the end of the day, grandma's welcoming us into her house and I don't want to be overly disrespectful. So for the one night that we spend at grandma's, I'll avoid any bread, but I'll still eat dinner and enjoy with everybody. You know, if it fell over Hanukkah, we would take our chanukiah to grandma's and we do the candles at grandma's over Christmas. So the only thing is I avoid bread while I'm there and I try to follow it as best as I can.
You don't bring your own meal and stuff like that with your own matzah, what have you, right? That would be not go over well there?
Not necessarily. We've never really tried. We don't run an Orthodox house, right? So, you know, I'm not selling my bread to my neighbor. You know, we as we approach Passover, we'll use all of our bread, but we don't do a large cleaning, you know, like some Jewish families will. We just avoid it.
Now, I read that you did a lot of talking before you got started. And so now you're probably old pros at this. It's not as difficult to do this because you guys got a routine going, some type of thing, sounds like, right?
Yeah.
How do you deal with the kids when they want to know whether they're Jewish and or other?
So they'll have all three boys will have bar mitzvahs. They are Jewish. So Jenny isn't Christian, she's agnostic. So we don't go to church. We go to synagogue, go to shul. We just did Eitz Chaim's chocolate Passover seder. And it was wonderful. They had way too much chocolate. But our boys are they're half Jewish. They're like Eastern European Jews. And then the other half is a mix of English and Irish and Indigenous, you know, like they are the Canadian melting pot, per se. And we're very open with it. And we explain that they're Indigenous and we explain that they are, you know, religiously they're Jews, culturally they are Jews, but we also do embrace the Indigenous side.
What does that look like specifically? Can maybe Jenny give me an example of what that they actually embrace for, like specifically of that of you?
For Indigenous, well, we have a lot of Indigenous art in our home, and we try to go to like ceremonies. We try to go to powwows and like folklorama and see that, like when they have the powwows and stuff there and the teachings and just having stuff around the house. And like we have a lot of soapstone and yeah.
What tips would you have for people that are hosting seders with interfaith guests that have never been to seders before? I have that happening to me this coming year. How do we make them feel welcome, and what should they do to get ready too?
I would say maybe slow down and explain things as you go. Don't necessarily wait until they have questions because they might not feel comfortable like interrupting or stopping what's going on, and just stopping when you think there's a good point that they might not know necessarily. Maybe just some of like the prayers and stuff like that, and what you do with like the Seder plate and why those things are on there and that kind of thing.
And David, any tips for people who are coming, what they should do before they get there, who are not Jewish?
It reminds me of a simple child that doesn't know enough to ask a question. I would say it's very much it's your job as the host to make them feel welcome and explain it, because there is that natural ignorance that comes with doing something new. And there's always that inherent fear of, am I going to ask a question that's offensive? And people typically, if they think that they're going to ask a question that might come off offensive, they're going to hold back. So that's one thing my family does. And my dad still leads all the services. He likes that, the head of the table. But he very much explains it and explains the importance and asks questions of the children. And the children that are attending the seders, you know, go from my youngest at 2.5 to we have one who's graduating this year, right? So he'll ask questions and get answers and create conversation. And you know, Jenny's not my first non-Jew at a seder. when I was in high school, we would actually invite all of my friends. They loved it. We would, we'd put my folks would invite 6 teenagers who aren't Jewish around the Seder, and my dad would explain the importance of it. And that's very much what it is just, even if it's just that simple thing of the marors to remember the bitter that we suffered, right?
That makes a lot of sense. And to tell them to eat a little bit at snack before they get there, because like 2 hours till you actually can eat, right? That's another thing to know.
Yeah.
That's a key thing.
Exactly. So Jenny, what's your favorite part, if anything, of Passover, whether it's something on the food or some kind of tradition? Is there anything that really you love about it?
Honestly, I just really love when like everyone's around the table and together, just like the family aspect of it and friends all just sitting around and being together. And I really like matzo lasagna, so that's always a plus for me.
Okay, so, but if there's anything you wanted to bring up or mention, I'm happy to turn the floor over to you, what you want our listeners to understand about how you do Passover.
It's the same way we do most things. It's Jenny says something, I take a hard stance, no, and we come back a day later and discuss it after our heads have cooled down.
Yeah.
But we're very much open communication about everything.
Yeah.
From when we first started dating, I think I brought up the Jewish importance like 6 months of us dating.
Yeah, really fast.
Because if this is going to go somewhere, I don't want to waste our time. We have to always be on the same page, whether it's children or where you live or your faith. It has to be open book. And with Passover, it's also about being, it's a give and take.
Mm-hmm.
Passover for us, I think, is actually probably the easiest holiday.
Why would you say that? That's interesting.
Well, because it's just, for the most part, it's just dietary restriction.
Yeah.
She puts chocolate around the house and the boys gather it up and eat it. Like that's Easter for this house. There's no going to church. There's none of that. So for us, just the Easter Pesach issue is a whole lot less as complex as the Christmas Hanukkah one was. That one took us a long time, from how do presents work? How do you split up the dollars? What are the rules? What's too many presents? Do you do Santa or not? We do not. Once you solved the December hurdle, everything else is pretty easy. That's what I would say, and just be patient.
Yeah.
In Toronto, after Passover, Rabbi Aaron Levy will host an interfaith event at his Makom congregation to mark the end of the holiday. It will be a traditional Sephardi-style Mimouna combined with an iftar break the fast for any Muslim friends and partners of his congregation's members. Rabbi Levy is an Orthodox rabbi who believes outreach to non-Jewish partners and kids is good for the Jewish people. Rabbi Levy joins me now from Toronto. I read an article recently that the whole point of Passover is to welcome the stranger into your home. Those who don't have, you should eat with them. And can you a little bit expand on sort of our responsibility as hosts of seders or Jewish families to follow that tradition?
Sure. So traditionally, the whole idea of kol dichvin yeteh v'yechol, let all who are hungry come and eat. So this traditionally applies really to other Jews and welcoming them to the Seder because they have an obligation to participate in Pesach Seders. And the idea of extending that to non-Jews as well can be a nice thing, especially if there are non-Jewish family members. But there's no real traditional obligation to invite non-Jews just because they're non-Jews to your Seder. And I would say that inviting non-Jews to one Seder is something that's permissible, and especially if it's about including non-Jewish members of a family, then it's, I think, an important thing to do in terms of not alienating people with it, whether we're talking about the non-Jewish folks themselves or also their Jewish partners as well, and other connected family members. And I think while there's less strong impetus toward non-Jews who don't have a familial connection to the Jewish community, it can be a nice thing to have non-Jews at one Seder as well, just as a learning experience for them.
Are there any suggestions that you might make for How would you, what are like 3 top things that a host could do, a Jewish host, to make somebody feel part of it?
I would say one is to talk to them in advance and give them a heads up about what it's going to be like. Let them know we're not going to be eating right away. There's going to be a number of different rituals, prayers, storytelling that are all part of it, and that it's a ritualized meal, and it's about re-experiencing slavery and liberation through the foods that we eat and the stories that we tell over the course of the seder. And so giving them some sort of context before they walk through the door would be helpful. I think then as one goes through the 15 steps of the seder, also just explaining where we are and what's going on, and having a seder in general, I think that is conversational, in which people are asking each other questions and there's discussion about what's going on, and people are interpreting it and talking about how it might mean something different to them, is a way to open up the seder and make it more meaningful for everybody, Jews or non-Jews.
That's 2. One more?
Okay.
Are there like videos they could watch or a book you might want to read? I mean, I'm giving out a kid's book this year, a brand new kid's book, because it's so simple and beautifully done that anyone could benefit from it.
Off the top of my head, one resource that comes to mind is the website My Jewish Learning, which is really great at making different topics in Judaism, including Jewish holidays, very accessible, whether to Jews or non-Jews. So that's generally a resource that I recommend, especially to non-Jews who are interested in learning.
And is there anything in the Seder that a non-Jewish guest should not be doing?
Right. Well, I wouldn't think that it'd be appropriate for a non-Jewish guest at a Seder to lead any of the rituals or brachot, blessings. I mean, it's unlikely that they would do so anyway, probably. But yeah, like I'd say any of the key aspects of the Seder should be led by a Jew. And
they could do some of the readings, like of the story, right?
Yeah, they could certainly participate, reading English passages and things like that. But there are definitely certain parts of the Seder that, at least from a traditional framework, are obligatory. And I would say that those should be done by Jews. Or at some Seders, like everybody, does those pieces all together, whether it's singing a bracha or reading a passage out loud all together. Like, if everyone's participating in it, then you don't have to make that differentiation.
They can't ask the 4 questions, right?
I would.
One of the 15 steps they're not allowed to do.
The 4 questions are part of Magid, part of the sort of the real crux of the Seder that's telling the story. Interestingly, from a halachic perspective, from traditional Jewish legal perspective, if people are asking questions about the Seder as sort of an organic course of events, like what is this? Why are we doing that? What's going on with this? Then you don't actually need to say Manishtana. You don't have to ask the 4 questions. Those are almost like a prompt. And I mean, it's still good to include them. It's tradition, it's nice. People are attached to it. But, so the idea is really that people are asking questions, and that the whole nature of the educational experience that is the Seder is one of questioning and answering and discussing and experiencing together, right? So the 4 questions themselves are not like, some holy thing that, must be said by a Jew, because actually they don't have to be said by anybody. They also don't have to be asked by the youngest person. I mean, like, even if you want to include the 4 questions in your Seder, which I would encourage folks to do, like, everybody could do it together. Different people could do different questions. Any person could do all 4 questions. You can do them in any language. Like, there's lots of ways.
This is shocking to me. Like, I can't even take this in. This is the first time anyone's ever told me that in all my years. I really learned a lot today that I have to digest. I want to wish you a happy Passover and good luck with your programs, and we'll be in touch on the other side.
Thanks so much, Ellen. Chag Kasher Sameach. Hope you have a really meaningful, liberating Pesach.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia. Integrity, community, quality, and customer care. Today's listener shout-out goes to Mark Pomerantz in Toronto, and we'll end with a little story from my own past about how I made Passover while I was living in a very Catholic country far from home. I recorded this little spot for my colleagues at the CJN's Bonjour Chai podcast for their 2nd annual Great Canadian Seder episode. We put the link to it in our show notes. Kol hakavod to our producer, Zach Kaufman, who also produces Bonjour Chai, because he did a masterful job in the sound design of that episode. Thanks for listening to the CJN Daily, and we'll be back tomorrow. I want to tell you a memorable Passover story, which dates back to when I was living and working in Rome, Italy in the late 1980s and early 90s. I was in my late 20s, and it was important to me, being so far away from Canada, to have a seder. I was working for the CBC, and I spent a lot of time at the Vatican as the correspondent, so you really feel lonely as a North American Jew there. And Italians are neither Ashkenazi nor Sephardis. They're Italian, and they have their own traditions dating back 2,000 years, but they were all very foreign to me. So one year, I decided to make my own seder. So I went into the ghetto in Rome, and I found matzah, and I found some kosher lamb, and I invited all the expatriate Americans and Canadians who were Jewish, who I knew, who lived in Rome at the time, and we started preparing to hold the seder. At the time, I was engaged to an Italian man. He was Catholic. He'd started the process of converting, and his family, or my in-laws, were as Catholic as it gets. I mean, they made sausage every fall out of a side of pork, which totally grossed me out, and they loved the Pope. But that afternoon, on Erev Pesach, my former sister-in-law walked into the kitchen, and she took a look at the box of matzah on my counter, and she cried out, "U pane azimo," which means matzah in her Calabrian Italian dialect. And I was stunned. I thought, wait, you're Catholic. How do you even know what matzah is? Then she told me that when she was little, she used to eat matzah and that their mother used to light the candles on Friday nights. And I didn't think much of it at the time. I was busy cooking for the Seder, but later I did a little investigating. And that family had serious Jewish origins. It turns out their mother's maiden name, Elia, was Italian for Elijah. And their father's last name was Gaudio, and that's a version of Isaac, and it meant laughter. And it could have been the name of a Jew who served as a jester in the Spanish king's court back in the 15th century. Now, those names were even listed in a scholarly book about the Jews of Italy who'd come from Spain and the Iberian Peninsula in the 15th century when the Jews were expelled, unless they converted to Christianity. Even so, some of these Jews continued to act as Christians on the outside, but practiced their Jewish faith in secret at home, and they were known by the derogatory name Marranos. Now, they never did anything about it, and neither did I, and that marriage ended years ago, and I've been blessed with a wonderful new husband and our children for whom I've made seders for 25 years or more now. But I always felt happy that even though my then in-laws probably saw me as the outsider, the Jewish girl from Canada who was the stranger who briefly married into their Catholic family, it turns out we weren't so far apart after all. Just that my in-laws were not aware of their own ancient Jewish DNA. Happy Passover to you all.